I was 5 months into grief when I opened my dead wife's glove box and found the proof she'd never really been mine. It was a photograph, her head resting on another man's shoulder, his hand on her thigh, smiling, comfortable, intimate. The kind of photo you don't take unless you've already crossed every line. Tucked behind it was a hotel receipt dated 3 months before she died. During the same week, she told me she needed space for a silent retreat. I had held down our daughter, Sage, and our life in Manhattan while she slipped away to a beachfront lie. At her funeral, I remember a man crying harder than I did, standing in the back like a ghost. I know now it was him, one of them. In that moment, something inside me didn't just crack, it snapped. Not with rage, with precision. Cold. Clean. A different kind of death. Not hers. Mine. The version of me that believed her. The version of me that begged for answers. I now had no interest in hearing. And that was the day I stopped grieving and started planning. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I was 5 months into mourning when I opened the glove box and discovered my wife's final betrayal. Selling the car was supposed to be symbolic, one small step toward closing a chapter I didn't sign up to live. The Maybach had sat untouched in our private parking space under the penthouse for months, gathering a thin coat of dust like it was waiting for someone who was never coming back. My therapist suggested a gentle purge of the past. I thought the car would be the easiest place to start. Mechanical. Detached. I was wrong. It started with routine gestures. I unlocked the doors remotely, slid into the leather driver's seat, and inhaled deeply. Her perfume still lingered, amber, vanilla, and something more artificial beneath it. A scent that once comforted now turned my stomach. I kept moving, robotic, wiped the dash, vacuumed the floor mats, cleaned out the center console, tossed loose change, lipstick tubes, a dried-out pen. That's when I opened the glove box. The click was quiet, innocuous, but what came next wasn't. An envelope rested on top of the owner's manual. It was thick, the corners bent, and my name was written on the front in her careful, slanted script. Julian, it read. No love, no always, no date, just my name. My pulse slowed, then spiked, like my body wasn't sure whether to flee or freeze. Isolde never wrote letters, never believed in long goodbyes. She once told me words lost their meaning the more you explained them. I used to find that mysterious, romantic. Now it felt sinister. I held the envelope in my hands for a long minute. It had weight, not just from what was inside, but from everything it might shatter. I opened it. There were 2 things, a photograph and a hotel receipt. I knew the man in the picture before I even registered why. It took me back to her funeral, late March, cold rain streaking the stained glass windows. I'd noticed him standing alone at the back of the chapel, dressed too casually for the occasion, eyes rimmed red, crying harder than I was. I thought he was a former coworker, or maybe an old flame she'd broken things off with long ago. I didn't know he was current. In the photo, Isolde sat beside him on what looked like a private terrace. Her head rested on his shoulder. His hand sat on her bare thigh like it belonged there. They weren't posing. They were caught. Natural. Easy. Practiced. You don't fall into that kind of intimacy overnight. The timestamp on the hotel receipt confirmed it. 3 months before the car accident. During the week, she claimed she was on a wellness retreat in upstate New York. She'd texted me things like, "I just need a little space. Please trust me." I did. God, I did. The ice didn't hit all at once. There was no explosion, no sobbing breakdown, just a cold crawl under my skin. A slithering, silent betrayal that burned the longer it stayed hidden. I looked back at the photo. She looked so happy, happier than she had with me in the last 2 years of our marriage, and not just happy, relaxed, known. Suddenly, her distance during those last months made cruel sense. The polite tone, the overly composed messages, her quick exits from rooms when Sage walked in, the way she never wanted to talk about our future plans anymore, always deflecting, always too tired. I sat there, my breath slowing to a hush, and realized the grief I'd carried wasn't clean. It had been threaded with a lie, one she took to the grave. I didn't scream, didn't rage. I folded the receipt back into the envelope, then stared out through the windshield at the Upper East Side's opulent stillness. Manhattan glittered above me, silent and uncaring. That night I didn't tell anyone, not Kieran, not Sage's nanny, not even my father. I poured myself a drink, logged into Isolda's cloud storage, and searched her backups. I was methodical, almost surgical. I needed truth like oxygen. What I found shattered any remaining illusions I might have clung to. There were more photos, intimate, sloppy, joyful, in a way I hadn't seen from her in years. Him kissing her neck, her laughing in his arms at a gallery opening I never knew she attended. A playlist labeled Drive to Luca's, filled with songs I didn't recognize but somehow already hated. And then a hidden album buried deep in an archived folder, labeled only with a date. Inside were screenshots of messages. Flirtation, plans, travel receipts, a second name, Alain, French, married, wealthy, another man, another secret. She hadn't just cheated. She had lived elsewhere, emotionally and physically, while I raised our daughter, handled her estate planning, and believed in the fantasy of fidelity. The woman I buried wasn't the woman I'd married. She was something else entirely. And the terrifying part? I wouldn't have known any of it if I hadn't opened that glove box. The next morning, I made a call. "Cross," came the familiar voice on the other end. "You want me to find someone?" "2 people," I replied. "Is this personal?" "No," I said. "It's surgical." Sorrel Vega didn't ask more. And that's why I trusted her. While she traced financial trails, timeline gaps, and surveillance footage from the Empire Suites, I reviewed every email Isolda had sent in the past year. I read them like a detective, not a husband. Her tone had shifted mid-2023, so subtle I'd missed it then. Shorter responses, tighter phrasing, less emotion. Then complete disappearance for 3-day spans, always explained with wellness retreats or board meetings. I noticed small lies folded into the big ones. Isolda told me she'd been at a fundraising dinner in early December, but the receipt in the envelope said otherwise. She'd been at a beachfront villa with Luca. She claimed she missed Sage's school play because of a migraine. I now knew she was in Paris, listed under a private jet manifest with Alain Desroches. I began printing everything. I built a timeline. I needed facts, not feelings. But it was Sage who unknowingly delivered the sharpest blow. One afternoon, she came into my study with a handful of colored drawings. "I found these in Mommy's things," she said softly. One showed Isolda and Mr. Luca at a beach. Another had a big house with Isolda, Luca, and me written in childish handwriting. The third was just hearts, dozens of them, around 3 stick figures, all holding hands. My stomach bottomed out. Sage had met him, more than once. My daughter had been looped into this fantasy life without my knowledge, without consent, without safety. This wasn't just betrayal, it was endangerment, deception that touched the one thing I loved more than Isolda. I looked at my daughter's wide, trusting eyes. I forced a smile. "These are beautiful," I said. "Can I keep them?" She nodded. "You miss her too, don't you?" I did, but not the woman she'd become. I missed the illusion I'd married. That night, I made a second call, to Karen. "I need to update my will," I said. "And I need to transfer all holdings out of any joint trust Isolde was named in, effective immediately." "What changed?" I opened a glove box. He didn't ask more. Within 48 hours, the investigation confirmed everything. Multiple aliases, offshore accounts, secret trusts linking Isolde to both men. She had been planning a complete exit, a financial and emotional severing from me. If she hadn't died in that car accident, I have no doubt I would have come home to a penthouse stripped bare and a custody battle I never saw coming. But fate had robbed her of the final move. And now it was my turn. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted truth, silence, and precision. I wanted to erase the monument I'd built to a ghost that never really existed. So I listed the Maybach for sale. I left everything as it was: her lipstick in the cup holder, the perfume in the air, even the faint outline of a pressed palm on the window. I wanted whoever bought it to know that luxury doesn't always mean honesty. When the man arrived to inspect it, he nodded in approval. "Looks well maintained." "It isn't," I said, handing him the keys. And for the first time in months, I meant it. 3 days after I found the photograph, the house stopped smelling like Isolde. It had clung to the velvet of the hallway curtains and the lining of her Hermes coats, some sharp blend of tuberose and bergamot she'd picked up in Florence and never replaced. I'd thought it might never fade, that she'd haunt the walls in scent even if memory dared to soften her. But by day 3, I noticed its absence. In its place was the sterile calm of new cleaning products and old wood. The townhouse had begun its slow, indifferent erasure. I stood in the walk-in closet she used to monopolize and opened one of the high glass drawers she insisted on custom ordering from Milan. Her jewelry still lay arranged like she was coming back. Cuff bracelets, enamel bangles, pearl-studded earrings that were always just tasteful enough for the Upper East Side luncheons. But none of it felt sacred now. None of it felt like her. I took the hotel receipt back out of my pocket for the 3rd time that morning. Empire Suites, Key Largo. 3 nights. Ocean view. Room 1103. The photo, folded perfectly behind it, had a time stamp. August 3rd. 3 months before the accident. I remembered that week well. She had told me she needed space, silence, a retreat for clarity. Said she felt spiritually drained and needed to unplug. So I had unplugged too, from suspicion, from conflict, from common sense. She didn't go alone. And now, the man in that photo had a face I recognized. He was at her funeral, dressed in black, face half hidden behind oversized sunglasses, standing in the back with the art world elite who didn't know her well but came anyway to be seen. That man cried harder than I did. Now I knew why. I closed the drawer. It clicked softly shut, the sound sharper in the silence of the house. I went downstairs, poured myself a neat bourbon even though it was barely 11 in the morning, and pulled out my laptop. Search. Luca Barone. Dozens of results. Curator. Italian-born, based in Manhattan. Lectures at Sotheby's Institute. Charmingly disheveled in every photo. 5 o'clock shadow, black cashmere, that too casual pose where confidence bleeds into arrogance. No wedding ring, no mention of a partner. But on his professional page, one tribute stood out. Posted the day Isolde died. Forever M. No last name, no explanation, just that. 1,000 thoughts stormed my head, none of them loud enough to scream. Only one held. He had mourned her like a lover. She'd given him the version of herself that smiled in photographs. I had gotten the one who rationed affection, who came home tired from parties and smelled of champagne and someone else's approval. I stared at Luca's tribute for a long time, then clicked away. I wasn't ready to confront. Not him, not anyone. Instead, I built a timeline. I printed every receipt, every calendar entry from her synced phone and tablet. Her passwords were saved on my keychain app, and she had never once assumed I'd look. I downloaded her cloud backups, email archives, message caches. The playlist called 1103 made my stomach tighten. I pressed play, ambient jazz, European love ballads. A French song she once told me reminded her of freedom, but not with me. I clicked through a folder titled Guest Wi-Fi. Buried inside were hidden photos, likely snapped with her second phone, the one she told me she'd lost in Capri, but that I later found wrapped in a shawl in our attic trunk. Photos of the same hotel room, same view, same man, same hands. His hands. By nightfall, the coldness inside me wasn't grief anymore. It was forensic. I wasn't just widowed. I'd been erased. 2 days later, I made my first move. "Sorrel Vega," I said, speaking into the mic as I stood outside Sage's ballet class, watching her through the glass. A woman picked up after the third ring, calm, direct. "Mr. Cross, I've heard of you. Kiran said you might reach out." Kiran had prepared the ground for me. I liked that about him, never wasted time on theater. "I need the whole picture," I said. "No noise, just facts. 2 men, 1 wife, 1 child caught in between. Discreet, fast." "I'm already working on it," she said, and that was that. That night, after Sage went to bed, I pored over her drawings, a sketch pad she kept in her reading nook. I'd never looked too closely until one caught my eye. A tall man in black with square glasses and tousled hair standing beside her mother. A beach in the background. Palm trees. I turned the page. There they were again, sitting at a small table. In front of them, coconut drinks. Her mother had said they were at a retreat center, that they didn't allow photos, but Sage had drawn them. I traced my finger over the man's face. I knew now. Luca Barone hadn't been a moment. He had been a pattern, and she had brought our daughter into it. That was when everything shifted. Not the betrayal, not even the humiliation. It was the recklessness, the arrogance, the gall of pretending it wouldn't one day come back and burn. A week after the first phone call, Sorrel's envelope arrived, cream-colored, heavier than I expected. Inside, timelines, expense reports, surveillance photos, even witness statements, and one additional name, Alain Desroches, a name I hadn't heard before, but now couldn't ignore. French investment banker, member of several philanthropic boards, Isolde co-chaired, also married, 2 children. The report documented a second affair, one that predated Luca, spa weekends in Aspen, art auctions in Paris. Dates that overlapped with times she claimed to be visiting her mother in Connecticut. There it was, the double life I hadn't dared to imagine. 1 affair was devastating. 2, a system. And somehow, her sister Gwyn had known. Her name appeared twice in the notes, used her apartment once as a mailing address for Isolde's travel invoices, had taken Sage for overnight visits when Isolde wasn't actually attending charity galas but boarding private jets. It wasn't just betrayal, it was infrastructure. I sat at my desk for hours, the file open in front of me. My hands didn't shake. My thoughts didn't spin. What I felt wasn't despair, it was preparation. I drafted a short note. She told us both we were the only one. Attached, the photo. I mailed it to Luca in a blank envelope. I mailed a second one to Alain, addressed to his private office. 3 days later, Luca responded. I didn't know. I'm sorry. No flourish, no denial. Just that. I didn't reply. I didn't need apologies. I needed them to sit in the same silence I had endured. The final step was the car. It had sat untouched for months in the lower-level garage, her custom Maybach SUV, black with cream leather interior. Her scent had faded, but the memory of her hands on the steering wheel hadn't. I couldn't bring myself to clean it again. Not after the glove box. Not after the truth. Instead, I scheduled the sale. The buyer was a businessman from New Jersey. He arrived at noon with his assistant, inspected the vehicle quickly, and handed me a check. You kept it in great condition, he said, offering his hand. I shook it. It isn't, I said. But he didn't ask for clarification. I didn't offer any. That evening, I went upstairs and pulled the last remaining piece of her wardrobe from the closet, a cream wool trench she wore every autumn without fail. I folded it neatly into a donation box and closed the lid. The house was beginning to feel like mine again. Quiet. Honest. I sat in the living room with Sage, watching her color as a thunderstorm rolled through outside. She glanced up. Daddy, can I draw a new storybook next? Of course, I said. What should it be about? I paused, thought carefully. A girl who finds out the truth, I said, and decides not to be afraid of it. Sage nodded, as if she understood. Maybe, in some way, she already did. I used to think there was safety in routine, that if you kept your head down, did what was expected, gave your heart fully and without condition, life would honor that loyalty. But the night after Sage fell asleep cradling a framed photo of Isolde, my Isolde, I cracked open the secure drive I hadn't dared open since the day I bought it for her. It sat in a labeled leather pouch at the bottom of a filing cabinet marked Foundation, Donor Materials. But it wasn't donor records I found inside. The folder tree was oddly minimalist for someone as obsessively organized as Isolde. One parent folder, innocuously titled Paris Archive, opened into 3 child folders: Exhibitions, Personal, and Private. The private folder required a password. I stared at the blinking field, pulse steady, then typed in the word that I, at one time, had thought no one else could know. Sageborn. The nickname Isolde gave our daughter when we adopted her. It unlocked. Inside were PDFs of travel itineraries with Alain Desroches' name, high-resolution photos clearly not taken by strangers, digital receipts from restaurants in Bordeaux and Rome, receipts for jewelry, not just one piece but many. One bore a handwritten note. To my eclipse. A. My stomach clenched, but I clicked on. There were screen recordings of WhatsApp calls, journal entries, her voice recordings. Luca called again. Her voice whispered from my laptop speakers, the lilt of champagne still in it. He's so needy. It's exhausting. At least with Alain, there's a mutual respect. I don't need to pretend to be soft. Another file. Julian's been so sweet today. I hate how guilt makes him more attractive. I closed the laptop and sat there, chest hollowed. It wasn't just the cheating, it was the contempt, the double lives, the comfort she found in playing puppeteer to everyone who loved her. And me, the biggest fool of them all. I didn't sleep that night. I read and reread her saved messages, listened to her confess to loving 2 men in different ways. The worst part? She sounded happiest in the lies, unburdened. By sunrise, I had mapped out a digital trail strong enough to sink reputations. Isolde had used the foundation as a laundering channel for at least 2 trips she claimed were donor-sponsored. I recognized the bank she'd routed private expenditures through, a boutique Monaco branch she opened years ago under her maiden name. At breakfast, Sage asked, "Daddy, are you mad at Mommy?" I choked mid-sip. No, baby, just missing her. She frowned. But you looked really mad last night. I saw you crying when I came downstairs. I wasn't crying because I was mad. I was sad that she wasn't who I thought she was. Sage studied me quietly, then picked up her fork. I draw her different now. She used to have gold around her head like a queen. Now I draw her in the dark. My breath caught. I called Kiran that afternoon and asked him to meet me at the townhouse. I needed someone level-headed, someone who wouldn't talk me down, but would help me think forward. When he arrived, I handed him a whiskey before I handed him the laptop. He scanned the drive for 15 minutes without a word, his jaw tightening, breath slowing. This is substantial, he finally said. You realize this isn't just cheating. These are fraudulent financial filings. Some of these grants were commingled with your own firm's design contracts. I nodded. And you saw the personal notes. Yes. And if she were alive, she'd be in prison. He looked at me then. What do you want to do with this? I want everything exposed, but I want control. I don't want to scream. I want to cut clean. Kiran nodded slowly. We'll need more evidence if you want to nullify any asset claims made by her estate or her sister. Which brings me to the second thing, I said. Gwyn. He flinched. She's never liked you. She's petitioning to move Sage in with her, using some clause about emotional continuity of maternal presence. She's implying I'm emotionally unstable. Kiran sighed. She's always played the long game. She knew if Isolde went down, she'd take the money train with her. I pointed at the screen. Then we make her regret that strategy. The next evening, I met Sorrel Vega at a speakeasy bar in NoHo. She looked exactly as I remembered. Matte black everything, from boots to lipstick. Private investigator to the elite, and someone I once paid to run a background check on a project donor who felt off. She'd come through in a matter of hours. I need discretion, I said. You always get it, she replied. I handed her the encrypted thumb drive. I want you to verify everything on here and dig deeper. I want the timeline mapped out. I want to know every lie, and I want paper trails, names, confirmations. She looked at the screen briefly and raised an eyebrow. She really was doing a masterclass in duplicity. I nodded, and she was careful, but not as careful as she thought. Do you want this to go public? She asked. Yes, but on my terms. First, I want to own the narrative. Second, I want to end this on my schedule. Third, I want Gwyn to be finished. She smiled. Vengeance or truth? Both, I said. But truth first. 3 weeks later, Sorrel returned with her full report. It was brutal in its thoroughness. Isolde's double life stretched back 2 years. Luca Barone, the art curator, was the first. Then Alain Desroches, who'd met her at an international gala where Sage and I had been present, but excluded from the private dinner she'd claimed was just donors. There were flights she never told me about, wire transfers from shell companies. One audio file was the final nail. She confessed to Gwyn that she intended to shift full custody of Sage to her if anything happened. Julian's too soft, she said, too attached to ideals. Gwyn can raise Sage for the real world. I sat in silence for a long time after hearing that, not because it was cruel, because it was calculated. The gala for the Isolde Wynn Cross Foundation was 10 days away. Gwyn had insisted on hosting it in Isolde's honor, and I hadn't declined. Instead, I confirmed my attendance, even offered to sponsor a new installation in her name. Gwyn sent a snide reply. Good to see you finally honoring her legacy. Let's not make this awkward, shall we? I replied, of course, we'll let the art speak. In the days leading up, I worked quietly. Kiran prepared the legal motion. Sorrel redacted sensitive data and printed the rest. I scheduled a last-minute revision to the video installation Gwyn was planning, a tribute to Isolde's life. Unbeknownst to her, my edit would play before hers. The night of the gala was as polished as expected. Velvet ropes, glass sculptures suspended mid-air, men in Tom Ford, women in Carolina Herrera. I wore all black, classic, clean. When I entered the venue, I saw Gwyn flanked by Isolde's former board members. Her smile was surgically curated. "Julian," she said through her teeth, "glad you could make it." I smiled back. Wouldn't miss it. As Sage ran up to hug me, I felt the full weight of what I was doing. This wasn't revenge. This was protection. A legacy rebuilt on truth, not curated deceit. When the lights dimmed, the MC took the mic to introduce a personal tribute presented by Julian Cross, devoted husband and co-founder. A short clip played, photos of Isolde and Sage, Isolde laughing at a donor gala, a few art installations. Then it paused. The next clip opened with a voice memo. Isolde: "Luca said he loved me. I said I loved him too, but I don't think I meant it. I loved the escape." Gasps rippled, then a still frame. Isolde and Luca in a Roman garden. His hand on her thigh. Then Alain. A text from him. "You're my North Star." Then the audio confession to Gwyn about Sage. The room went cold. The screen faded to black. I stepped up to the podium. "I loved Isolde deeply, but the woman you thought you knew wasn't the woman I married or mourned." I paused. We all carry myths about the people we love. Tonight, I put that myth to rest, not to shame her, but to free those of us left behind. Gwyn stood, face ghost pale. "This is disgraceful," she hissed. I turned to her. "No. What's disgraceful is building a legacy on fiction." Then I stepped down. Kieran met me outside. "You just lit the match." "Good," I said. The real fire was coming next. That week, Gwyn's trustees revoked her voting rights. Donors withdrew. The foundation's name was put under review. And Sage? She didn't ask for her mother once. Instead, she said, "Can I draw us now? Just us two?" "Yeah, baby," I whispered, pulling her close. "Just us." The evening Sage and I returned from Montauk. There was a different kind of silence in the penthouse. It wasn't the serene quiet that follows healing. It was the quiet that lingers before a storm. I'd left her bedroom door open. I wanted her to know I wasn't hiding. I was reclaiming space, reclaiming power. But it was a knock on the door the following morning that finally broke the illusion of peace. Kieran stood there, trench coat soaked from the April rain, holding an envelope thick with still-drying ink and finality. "Isolde's attorney sent this. She's filing for primary custody," he said flatly, stepping inside. My chest burned, not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. Inside was a declaration. I was emotionally unstable, reckless, incapable of providing a secure environment for Sage. I read it all silently, lies stacked atop half-truths. And then I saw the signatures, hers and his, Luca Barone, as domestic partner and witness. She was painting me as unstable while parading her affair as a wholesome, stable family unit. I turned to Kieran. "They think they can erase me." "They're trying to," he said, "but we won't let them." I didn't flinch. I didn't shout. I didn't break. Instead, I sat down at my desk and pulled out my laptop. Then it's time I finish what I started. The next 2 days, I didn't sleep. I combed through every file, photo, timestamp, and credit card statement I'd compiled. Every check-in, every overlap, every lie. I wanted a timeline so airtight that even a judge couldn't squeeze doubt through the cracks. Sage was quiet around me, more observant than usual. I made sure her routine never broke. Breakfast together, stories at night, laughter where I could muster it. I shielded her like a fortress. She didn't need to know the war happening in the walls. By day 3, Kiran brought in a custody strategist, Lucinda Hart, sharp as glass and twice as cold. She's angling for sole legal and physical custody. But what's worse, Lucinda said as she slid a file across the table, they've enrolled Sage in a new private school, starting next term, in Florence. Florence, Italy? I asked, the words ripping through me. Yes, she replied, and her application was signed by both Isolde and Luca, without your consent. My knuckles went white. They were planning to take her away, physically, emotionally, permanently. She forged my consent? Looks like it, or more likely, claimed joint custody. I swallowed the fire rising in my throat. How long do we have? Less than 2 weeks before enrollment locks. And just like that, the stakes shifted from custody to abduction. That night, I asked Sage a question I hadn't dared before. If you could go anywhere in the world, where would you go? She blinked. Somewhere where no one's yelling. My throat tightened. I smiled gently. That's a good choice. She looked up from her book. Can I stay here forever? I nodded. I'll do everything I can to make sure of that. She hugged me harder than usual. My heart split in a quiet, painful way. The next morning, Kiran and Lucinda filed an emergency motion to block any international travel, but legal filings alone wouldn't save us. I needed proof that Isolde's new life wasn't the safe, picture-perfect fantasy she'd sold to the court. That came from a name I hadn't expected, Jonas Reeve, a former client of Luca's architecture firm. His name had popped up in a whistleblower thread I stumbled on through a private back channel. Luca Barone is a snake in a suit. He took our investment, falsified zoning permits, and disappeared the minute the inspectors showed up. I arranged a call. Jonas didn't hesitate. I've been waiting for someone to take him down, he said. What do you need? Everything. 2 days later, Kiran and I sat in his office reading a 32-page document that could bury them both. Investor fraud, offshore shell companies, and bribes to 2 local inspectors. He's under SEC investigation. Quiet for now. But if this leaks, they'll run, Kiran finished, especially if they think you'll expose it in court. I leaned back, exhaling. Then let's give them a reason to panic. The next twist came from someone even closer, Soraya. She visited late one evening, her arms full of takeout and concern. I saw Isolde at the Met Gala pre-event, she said, unpacking soup. She wasn't wearing her ring, but Luca, he was wearing a watch I bought you, the exact one. I looked up sharply. He doesn't even try to hide it anymore. What else? I asked. Soraya hesitated. She was whispering to Marla about something. A plan. I didn't catch it all, but it involved Sage and getting ahead of the curve. I gritted my teeth. Isolde was manipulating every conversation behind velvet curtains and high society smiles. You know, Soraya continued, for someone who used to swear she never wanted to be a mother, she's sure eager to play one now. I froze. What did you say? She told me years ago, when you first talked about having kids. She wasn't ready. She only did it for you. The room spun. A memory crashed through me. The fertility treatments, the tears, the way she once whispered, I'm doing this for us. But maybe she never meant us. Maybe she meant me and her career. Maybe Sage had always been a pawn in a game I didn't know I was playing. By now, every lie was a thread unraveling her new narrative, and then came the call, private, blocked, but I knew the voice. Julian, Luca's voice said calmly, we need to talk, man to man, I didn't answer right away. We both know this is getting out of hand. There's a way to settle this, quietly. Say what you really mean, I said. You're not going to win. You know that, right? I almost laughed. That's funny. I was about to tell you the same thing. He sighed. Isolde's done being your shadow. She's building a future. Sage is safer with us. My vision blurred with rage. You think bouncing her between your lawsuits and designer scandals is safer? Julian, be reasonable. We're giving her stability. No, you're giving her a cage lined in couture and arrogance. I suggest you drop this, or things will get difficult. I smiled coldly into the receiver. You already made them difficult when you got involved with a married woman and tried to play father to a daughter that isn't yours. Click. War declared. 3 days later, the judge granted us an emergency evidentiary hearing. That morning, I wore the same suit I wore the day I buried my wife, except this time, I wasn't mourning her. I was unmasking her. Isolde sat across the aisle in a navy blue dress, hair sleek, expression flat. Luca beside her, smug in tailored charcoal. The courtroom was cold, quiet, but my blood pulsed like thunder. Kieran presented everything: the forged school documents, the fake consent, the filed SEC complaints. The judge listened intently, then turned to me. Mr. Pierce, do you have anything to add? I stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. I do. I walked to the bench and placed a small stack of photographs down. A progression, Isolde's texts to me during her retreat, her exact GPS pings at the hotel, receipts, timestamps, then photos of her and Luca laughing poolside while I sent her updates on Sage's flu that week. She told me she needed time to recover, that she was depressed, so I held our life together. I protected Sage. I didn't ask questions. I paused, holding up the last image. This man wasn't just her affair. He was her escape plan. While I was caring for our daughter, she was building a lie. Silence. The judge nodded. Thank you. After the hearing, I stood in the marble corridor alone. I didn't wait for her. I didn't look back. But I heard her heels. Julian! She called behind me. I stopped but didn't turn. I never meant to hurt you. I exhaled. That's the problem, Isolde. You never meant anything. You just did it. She stepped closer. You're not the only one who's grieving. I turned slowly. No, I'm the one who buried my wife. You're the one who buried your truth. She blinked. So what now? I met her eyes, cold, sharp, final. Now I fight, not for revenge, but for Sage. Then I walked away, and didn't look back. I didn't sleep the night after Luca's voice note. I didn't even sit. I stood for hours in the glass atrium of my penthouse overlooking Central Park, watching the city's lights flicker like they were blinking in disbelief right alongside me. Luca's words kept echoing. She told me she was filing for divorce, that you were done. Every syllable scraped the inside of my skull. I had trusted Isolde with everything. She had not only betrayed me with her body, but also had rewritten our narrative behind my back. The next morning, the sunlight hit different, sharper, almost surgical. I had Jonah ready the car while I sat with Sage in the kitchen. She was munching on a strawberry, her eyes still half-lidded from sleep, and I realized I had a duty, not just to myself, but to her. To protect her from the rot that had wormed its way into our lives, from her mother's lies, from Luca. Isolde was at the Four Seasons, not at her spa retreat as she'd told our daughter. I knew because I had someone watching. Her bags were still packed, not even opened. Luca had been there the day before but had left. She wasn't expecting me. I knocked, then used the key I had from an old anniversary surprise. She stood frozen in a bathrobe, holding her phone, mascara smeared slightly under her eyes. "Julian?" she asked, a flicker of panic passing over her features. "You always were dramatic with your retreats," I said coolly. "But this isn't self-care, is it? This is exile." She inhaled to speak, but I raised my hand. "You don't get to lie anymore." Her expression hardened. "I suppose Luca told you everything." "Not everything," I replied. Just enough to detonate what little sympathy I had left. She walked to the minibar and poured herself vodka. It was 10 a.m. "I made mistakes." "No," I said. "You curated betrayals. You didn't trip and fall into Luca's bed. You mapped your descent like a seasoned strategist. So now, I need you to listen very carefully." She narrowed her eyes. "Or what? You'll scream? Throw something?" "No," I said, stepping closer. "I'll take everything. And I'll do it quietly, efficiently, like a surgeon removing a tumor. But unlike you, I won't leave a mess behind." She scoffed. "You think you can win in court? My father still sits on the board of—" I cut her off. "That's the thing about corruption, darling. It always leaks eventually. And my legal team has been collecting buckets." I tossed a manila envelope onto the bed. Inside were the forensics from the private investigator, emails, photos, Luca and Isolde, Florian and Isolde, hotel receipts, matching timestamps. One folder even had school tuition money rerouted for spa treatments. Her mouth parted slightly. You went through my accounts?" "No," I said. "I went through our accounts, but what I found were yours." The silence between us swelled like a balloon. Then she snapped. "You were never there, Julian. Always in a meeting, always making deals. I needed someone." I nodded. "So you auditioned 2 men and failed to disclose the results to your husband." "Got it." She hurled the glass. It shattered behind me. I didn't flinch. "You wanted war, Isolde?" I said, voice lowering. "You've got one, but I don't bleed. I build." And then I walked out. The week that followed was warfare by email. Jonas Crane worked like a machine, filing motions for custody, preparing to subpoena Luca and Florian, freezing assets in shared accounts. We moved fast. Isolde tried to respond through her legal team, half-threats, character assaults, but it all crumbled against the mountain of documentation we had. Luca, it turned out, had a lot to lose too. His wife, Jennifer, had been in the dark until I sent her the same file I'd given Isolde. She filed for separation within 48 hours. Florian's fiancé, gone, along with her trust fund commitment to his tech startup. These men weren't just cowards. They were fools, and they underestimated how quickly an exposed lie can collapse the scaffolding of a double life. I didn't gloat. I documented. I built structure. Every move was calculated. The media caught on by the 3rd week. "Real Estate Titan Files for Divorce from Socialite Wife Amid Scandal," headlined page 6. Infidelity web involving 2 high-profile investors, surfaces in Manhattan, divorce battle. Isolde's PR team spun it as privacy violations, but the documents were court-filed, public. One night, Soraya came by with a bottle of Lagavulin. "You look like a man halfway up a mountain but already planning the descent." "I can't afford to celebrate until Sage is safe," I replied. "And when that's done?" she asked. I didn't answer, because honestly, I hadn't thought about after. The custody hearing began on a rainy Thursday. Isolde wore black, a plea for pity. I wore navy, steady, resolute. Sage didn't attend, thank God. Judge Sampson was old school but sharp. Jonas presented evidence first. Emails, schedules, statements, video footage from hotel security. Isolde's lawyer objected repeatedly, but it all stood. Then came the character witnesses, Soraya, Claudine. Even Charles from Alden Butler testified to overheard phone calls where Isolde bragged about Luca like a prize. Isolde sat expressionless. Then came her turn. She tried to flip the narrative, claimed emotional neglect, gaslighting, claimed I pressured her into elite motherhood, that I cared more about appearances than affection. But the receipts told a different story. Do you deny redirecting $60,000 from your daughter's education account to a personal spa fund in St. Bart's? Jonas asked. Her lips trembled. That money was a loan. No record of repayment, he said flatly. Next question. It was brutal, but clean. Judge Sampson asked to speak with me privately the next morning. We met in his chambers. You're not the first wealthy couple to implode in this courtroom, he said, but you're the first who's kept his dignity intact. Thank you, Your Honor. I'm granting you primary custody. Isolde will retain visitation rights under structured supervision until further notice. Financial settlements will follow standard division minus proven misappropriations. But I recommend arbitration for property. I nodded. Understood. I didn't smile. I didn't weep. I simply felt empty. Back at home, Sage was in the garden with Claudine and Sketch. I watched from the kitchen window. She was laughing. I walked out slowly. She turned. Daddy? I knelt. Yes, my love. Are you happy? I paused. Not yet, but I'm on my way. She nodded, then held out her hand. In it was a small pressed flower. For you, it's called Bleeding Heart. I took it. Of course it is, I whispered. The weeks turned to months. The chaos faded into rhythm. Sage settled. My firm thrived. I released a new project in Hudson Yards that drew international buzz. The press tried to dig, but the story had gone stale. Isolde? She moved to a townhouse in Soho, alone. Her social appearances dropped. Her brand contracts dissolved one by one. Luca went to Europe, a failed venture in Spain. Florian, arrested for securities fraud in May. I never called them, never replied to the few pathetic emails that trickled in. The victory wasn't in shouting, it was in silence. And one night, I walked past Isolde at a charity event. She saw me holding Sage's hand. I nodded. She tried to smile. I didn't return it, because I no longer needed to. The silence in the penthouse wasn't peaceful. It was surgical, sharp as a scalpel. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the echoes of Luca's betrayal, Isolde's deceit, and the weight of my own restraint. The manila envelope I had dropped on the floor earlier that day, Karen's final report, still lay there like a bomb that had already exploded. The detonation had started when I opened it. Now came the aftershocks. I couldn't stay still. I moved from room to room, collecting the last fragments of the woman I had once loved. Her perfume bottle, still uncapped on her vanity. A pair of heels discarded beneath the bed like a careless afterthought. A scarf, still faintly scented, stuffed in the back of the coat closet. But I no longer touched any of it with nostalgia. Every object had become evidence, not memory. Sage was staying the night at my father's. I had arranged that earlier, anticipating that what I'd learned today might leave me unraveling. Instead, I was disturbingly calm, clinical, methodical. The fury had passed. What was left now was control, precise, calculated, absolute. Kieran's report was thorough. It always was. But one paragraph wouldn't stop echoing in my mind. The primary affair with Barone appears to have begun over 2 years ago. But based on corroborated witness accounts and travel logs, the secondary affair, with Grant Heller, dates back 3.5 years. During that time, Isolde Wynne Pierce maintained overlapping physical and emotional relationships with both men, including extended overnight stays at separate private residences. while preserving the facade of a monogamous marriage with you. Facade. That word cut deeper than any photo or hotel receipt, because that's what my life had been, a performance. While I spent years building our firm, protecting Sage, honoring my vows, she'd been starring in a production that I didn't even know I was cast in. Worse still, both men had known about me. Eventually, Luca had posed as a colleague at fundraising events. Grant had donated to a gala she chaired. They'd smiled, toasted, shaken hands. I was a footnote in my own life, a backdrop to their deception. I walked to my study and opened the drawer where I kept my second cell phone, the one I rarely used. I dialed the number I had saved from the PI's report. It rang 4 times before someone answered. "Mr. Royce," the voice on the other end said, cautious but composed. Grant Heller. "I'm not calling for apologies," I said. "Just confirmation." There was a pause. "Then you already know." "I do." Another beat of silence. "I didn't know she was married until nearly a year in," Grant said. "When I found out, I confronted her. She said your marriage was complicated, that you were gay but closeted, that it was a business arrangement." I almost laughed. Almost. "And you believed that?" "I wanted to," he said simply. "By the time I realized she was lying, I was too far in." I didn't respond. "I'm sorry," he said, quieter now. "For what it's worth." It wasn't worth anything, but I let it hang in the air anyway. I ended the call without another word. I didn't owe him, or Luca, or Isolde anything, not even my anger. Instead, I called Kiran. "It's time," I said. "Understood," he replied. "We'll move forward with the strategy as outlined." That meant 2 things. First, the prenup activation clause would be triggered based on demonstrable infidelity and sustained misrepresentation of marital intent. Second, the motion for emergency custody would be filed under sealed evidence, photos, texts, timelines. But the third piece was mine alone to execute. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window of the master bedroom, the same one where Isolde and I had once made plans for the future. The room now felt like a crime scene. By morning, the plan was in motion. The formal divorce papers were hand-delivered to Isolde by a private courier. She wasn't home when he arrived. She was at brunch with Luca. The courier found her on the rooftop terrace of the Ludlow Club. Witnesses reported her laughing, a flute of champagne in hand. The moment the envelope was presented, that laughter reportedly died on her lips. Inside, the documents were precise, cold, legal, a complete dismantling of our shared life. With evidence annexed, asset freezes noted, and an immediate request for temporary full custody of Sage, citing moral and environmental harm. But it wasn't the paperwork that broke her composure. It was what came with it. A single USB drive labeled in her handwriting, "To be opened only if you're gone." She had written it 2 years ago. I'd found it inside her jewelry box, the one she thought I never opened. She had recorded a message on it, a raw, emotional confession of love, not to me, but to Luca. In the video, she said she wished she could be with him forever, but couldn't risk losing the Royce name and its financial safety net. She called me uncomplicated, predictable, safe. She said she hoped I'd never find out. Now she knew I had. By the time she arrived home, the locks had already been changed. She pounded on the penthouse door like a woman possessed, screaming my name. I didn't answer. I was at my father's brownstone, tucked into the study, holding Sage's hand as she did her homework. She didn't ask where her mother was. She didn't need to. By nightfall, the city buzzed. News spread fast in Manhattan's elite social scene. Everyone knew something had happened, though they didn't know what. Yet. The final piece came the next morning, A private link. A 7-minute video. Uploaded anonymously but blasted across discrete social media groups where the city's high society lingered. The video opened with Isolda's USB confession. It cut to footage of her and Luca in the Hamptons, laughing in swimsuits, clearly intimate. Then to Grant, kissing her cheek at a private event, followed by the financial records, joint accounts in her name and Luca's, unexplained transfers, cryptic wire instructions to foreign banks. The video closed with my voice, over a still image of our wedding photo. To everyone who thought they knew us, I didn't lose her. She lost me, and I will not carry her lies a day longer. The fallout was immediate. The non-profit boards she chaired began to distance themselves. Her name was scrubbed from press releases. Her PR firm released a neutral statement citing private matters and ongoing legal proceedings. And Luca? He disappeared. Rumor had it his firm forced him into an indefinite leave. His wife had filed for divorce. His assets were being audited. Isolda tried to call, dozens of times. She left voicemails filled with sobs, apologies, gaslighting, rage, even threats. I didn't respond to a single one, not because I was cruel, because I was done. Done being lied to, done being used, done giving parts of myself to people who only knew how to take. Instead, I gave everything I had to the one person who mattered, Sage. Every day after school, I picked her up myself. We cooked together, studied together, laughed together. Slowly, the shadows of the past began to recede. One afternoon, she looked up from her sketchbook and said, "I'm glad it's just us now, Dad." And for the first time in months, I felt something like peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of truth. The court hearing was 2 weeks later. Isolda arrived with a new legal team, her hair pulled back tightly, her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. She tried to look composed, but her hands shook when she passed me in the hallway. I didn't flinch. The judge reviewed the documents silently. When it came time to speak, my lawyer, Kieran, stood and delivered our case with surgical clarity. Evidence, timelines, witness statements, financial reports, character evaluations. Isolda's team tried to counter, claimed emotional duress, accused me of orchestrating a smear campaign, but the judge wasn't swayed. He ruled in my favor. Full custody, pending final review, temporary restraining order, asset division frozen, prenup enforced. Her inheritance was untouched, but she'd walk away from everything we built together. After the ruling, she looked at me one last time, eyes red, lip trembling. "You never even tried to forgive me," she whispered. I held her gaze. "You never even tried to stop." And with that, I turned and walked out of the courtroom. Outside, the spring air smelled like new beginnings. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. This wasn't just revenge. It wasn't even justice. It was freedom, and I had earned it. The last box was taped shut before sunrise. My apartment, once cluttered with memories that didn't belong to me, was sterile now. Quiet. Clean. I hadn't realized until that morning how heavy silence could feel when it was no longer weaponized by someone else. It was finally mine. Soraya called just after 8. "It's the last day," she said. Her voice was soft, like she didn't want to disturb something sacred. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." She didn't push. I appreciated that. There had been too many people who needed their version of closure when I was still bleeding. Soraya had always given me space, and when I was ready, she was still there. I had invited her to the final court hearing, but she declined. "This part is for you, not me," she said. "But when it's over, come to the cafe. I'll be waiting." As I stepped out of the brownstone, Manhattan was just beginning to hum awake. April sunlight spilled between the buildings, golden and unbothered. It felt indifferent in the best way, like I wasn't being watched anymore. The courthouse was cold, even with the morning light stretching across the marble floors. The echo of my shoes in that long corridor felt different this time, steadier. Last time I stood here, my hands had trembled while signing over the temporary custody agreement, while Isolde looked on like she was already somewhere else, somewhere warmer and more convenient. Luca hadn't come that day. Cowards rarely show up when there's nothing left for them to take. Today it was just me, and Jonah and Sage. They sat quietly with Kieran on the bench outside Judge Sampson's chambers. Jonah was old enough to understand why today mattered. Sage only knew that Daddy was wearing his nice coat and hadn't stopped smiling all morning. The hearing was short, formal. Isolde didn't bother contesting the final terms. Her attorney made a last-ditch appeal for future access, but even Judge Sampson looked unimpressed. The evidence of her neglect, years of it, was no longer buried in sentiment. It was laid bare, documented, printed, and unignorable. I was awarded full physical and legal custody. She retained nothing. "Mr. Pierce," Judge Sampson said at the end, tapping his pen lightly against the folder, "I hope this gives you peace." "It gives me clarity," I said. That was better than peace. Clarity is what truth becomes when you stop apologizing for finding it. I took Jonah and Sage out for lunch at their favorite spot on Madison Avenue. They didn't want to talk about the courtroom, and I didn't push. Instead, we ordered milkshakes and waffles, and they laughed at nothing, and I let the sound of their joy stitch something back together in me. When I dropped them off at school later that afternoon, Sage kissed my cheek and said, "Daddy, does this mean you're happy now?" I crouched to her level, brushing a curl from her cheek. "It means I get to be your dad every day without anyone taking that away." "Even on Mondays?" she asked seriously. "Especially on Mondays," I smiled. She nodded like she was closing a deal and ran inside. By early evening, I was back at the cafe. Soraya was waiting, just like she promised, with 2 mugs of coffee and that look she gave when she knew something big had finally ended. "Well?" she asked as I sat across from her. I reached into my coat pocket and slid the stamped court order across the table. She read the headline, "Full custody granted." Then she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for a year. "You did it." "No," I said. "We did it." Her eyes filled, but she blinked them dry. "So what happens now?" I leaned back in my chair. "Now, I live. And they grow up in a home where love doesn't come with lies." She nodded slowly. "And Isolde? She's free and irrelevant." That night I returned home to an apartment that no longer whispered her name in the corners. I lit a candle, vanilla, like the one she used to wear, and placed it on the windowsill, not as a tribute, but a reclamation. This scent wasn't hers anymore. It was just a scent. The past didn't get to poison the air. I sat on the couch and opened the final envelope from the private investigator. It had arrived the day before, but I hadn't had the heart to look. Inside was a copy of the restraining order against Luca, now approved and enforceable. Attached was a blurry photo of him leaving the city last week, carrying a single duffel bag and looking like the ruined man he always was behind the smug facade. There was also a note from the PI. "Some endings don't need closure, just silence." He was right. The next morning, I took the last walkthrough of the garage. Isolde's Jaguar was already gone, sold to a collector in Chicago. The smell of betrayal was gone with it. In its place was space, literal and emotional. I walked past the storage cabinet I once ignored. I opened it. Inside was a forgotten shoebox I hadn't noticed before. Dusty, but intact. Inside were childhood drawings from Sage. One had Daddy written in huge block letters. Another was a stick figure family with one figure X'd out. I didn't know when she'd drawn it, but the message was clear. Even children sense the absence of truth. I folded the drawings carefully and took them upstairs. That afternoon, I updated my will. I listed Jonah and Sage as sole beneficiaries. I transferred the deed to the house into a trust for them. I closed the shared investment account Isolde had fought for and reopened one in my name only. Financially, she would get nothing more. Not from me, not from them. Later that week, I walked into Jonah's school for career day. I wore a tailored navy suit, no tie, sleeves rolled. I told the room of wide-eyed kids about the architecture firm I built from scratch, about how creating homes for others had helped me rebuild my own. When I finished, Jonah stood up from his desk and said, "That's my dad." Not even Isolde could buy a moment like that. I ran into Gwen a few weeks later at a charity gala. She looked tired, brittle in a way that makeup couldn't cover. "You humiliated her," she hissed when she cornered me by the coat check. "No," I said calmly. "She did that to herself. She's lost everything. She lost herself a long time ago. The rest was just math. She's not well, Julian." "She wasn't well when she was cheating in my bed, Gwen, and she wasn't well when she lied to our kids. If you want to play savior, go ahead, but don't bring that poison back to me." She stared at me like she didn't recognize who I'd become. I smiled. "This is what surviving looks like. The last email Isolde ever sent me was one line: 'You win.' I didn't reply. Victory didn't need applause, just peace. And I had plenty of that now. Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come from strangers, but from those we once trusted with the most sacred pieces of ourselves. And yet, it is in the aftermath of that betrayal, when the silence settles and the truth no longer hides, that we begin to reclaim who we are. This story was never just about loss or heartbreak or deceit. It was about awakening, about finding the courage to look at what's broken and deciding not to mend it for someone else's comfort, but to rebuild it for your own freedom. Healing doesn't always arrive wrapped in forgiveness. Sometimes it comes in boundaries, in choosing peace over closure, in raising your children in truth instead of illusion. And sometimes healing is simply knowing you don't need to win anyone back. You just need to return to yourself. Because the most powerful kind of love is the one you give yourself after someone tried to convince you that you weren't enough. Thank you for joining us for this emotional journey. If this story touched you in any way, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We'll see you in the next story.